All right. Well, the verdict is in. The jury awards not 1.7 billion, $5 billion to homeowners in this commission lawsuit. I can't believe it. To be honest with you guys, I am shocked that the jurors in this 2-week commission trial took 2 hours and 28 minutes when they had a whole week to deliberate. It took them 2.5 hours, and not even that. It only took them about an hour, hour and a half to figure out to like get some calculations on what the damages were going to be. And so, from my understanding, they were deliberating for about an hour, hour and a half. They come out of the deliberation room. Hey, how do we calculate damages again? In an hour. I mean, it was almost like they had their minds made up before there was nothing to deliberate outside of calculations on how much they were going to award. So there's a lot for us to break down in today's episode. So first off, what were your guys' initial reactions? Dominic, I'll go to you first. Then Ben, I'll get your initial reactions and we'll talk through it.
Well, thanks, Brandon. I appreciate it. And like I'm sure many agents and real estate folks are, I'm shocked. I'm stunned for a number of reasons. The first is how weak the case was that NAR presented in closing arguments. If you read through those notes, like, wow, I'm wondering to myself, is this part of a bigger strategy that includes more cunning than I can possibly imagine, and that they've got some deep plan to take this up to the 8th District Court of Appeals and get a retrial there? Is that the plan? Because I couldn't see any of the arguments that we've discussed in the past as to why this case had very little merit. But the next thing I thought is, okay, the decision by this jury telegraphs that even in the event that you sign a clear and concise contract that's transparent, it's meaningless. If a few years down the road you decide, hey, you know what, that wasn't fair, and some lawyer approaches you and says, you paid more than you should have 5 years ago, even though you got your house sold for the price you want and the deal you asked for, that wasn't fair. And now we're setting this precedent that's okay. And what it says to me is that we need tort reform, but that's a whole nother podcast. And then now I'm thinking, all right, well, listen, I've still got a lot of business to take care of, buyers to take care of, lots of sellers to take care of. But if I was an agent that had set up my business based on solely serving buyers or predominantly serving buyers, I would be taking a close look at my business.
Yeah. So I want to talk about that strategy piece. I want to come right back to that after we get Ben's initial reactions, and that's exactly where we're going to start. So Ben, what were your initial reactions? You saw the verdict come out yesterday. What was your initial reaction?
Yeah, just blown away that they won. I mean, the fact that as a defendant, like, you've gone into this before, like what you need to do to defend versus like come out and just attack and overturn this. Like, it's mind blowing that even their approach, we can unpack a little bit more. Their approach of how this is a scheme and, you know, all these people collude it together to make this happen is just mind-blowing. And then as quick as they got to it, I mean, I thought it could take days for them to come to a conclusion, and it was an hour and a half, 2 hours. Like, it's insane. I thought this was going to get thrown out a long time ago, never get to this point. Like a lot of people, I'm just shocked that it got to this point.
Yeah. So what I did a little bit last night and even this morning, Ben, you and I, we just had a conversation with one of the attorneys we work with just to kind of get their thoughts on this so we could, as we cover this, that's why I didn't want to make this video yesterday, because I wanted to get some contextual information from an attorney on what this means, because that's what I want to focus on for the audience sake. The real estate people that watch and listen to this show that are up in arms and they're worried, I want to give them a look of what things could look like moving forward. And the first thing is around what Dominic said, which was this appeal process. So here's what I found out. Number one, when you look at the damages, right? So here's what happened. is, I'll go back to this. So the suit represents approximately 500,000 homeowners seeking reimbursements for the $1.78 billion in commissions that they paid to buyer broker. That was the damages that they built the case on. In addition to that, under the law, the damages were automatically trebled to $5.3 billion. So I say, well, what does that mean? So based on my understanding is those are the punitive damages. So the jury said, okay, you sued based on the 1.7 billion, which is cut and dry. That's what you guys pay that you want back. We agree. The punitive damages is the penalty. This is ensuring that there's enough pain inflicted to the defendants that it doesn't happen again. And Ben's got some good language around that. I don't know if you still have that, Ben. You want to read how they came to that or what that means, and then we'll talk about that a little more. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, I mean, the idea behind it is just to, like you said, so the penalty or compensation is severe enough to discourage that type of behavior and to provide a significant remedy to the people who were wronged, right? And maybe, you do the math on the 1.8 billion, you divide that, it came out, even if there's no, which we know isn't going to be true, no payment to the attorney, they would end up at like $3,600. So at this number, maybe it gets more to like the average price point divided by the people involved at the average commission over those years. I don't know.
Yeah. So typically in a big lawsuit, from my understanding, Dominic, it's the punitive damages, right? So if you and I go to court and you stole $100 from me and I want my money back, right? So if I win, I get my $100 back, and the jury found punitive damages because you put me through emotional stress, this, that, or the other thing, and they awarded additional funds. So that's how it went from 1.7 to $5 billion. And then the other thing is around the appeal thing that you talked about. So in my understanding, okay, and had some few conversations with a few attorneys, that is what, now listen, this is all speculative, right? We don't know what's going to happen, but this is all part of the appeal strategy, meaning this, that some of the attorneys I've talked to said NAR didn't want to show any of their cards in this case because they want to take it to a higher court, and you just haven't seen anything yet. That they kind of knew that this is the way it was going to go. Some attorneys call this halftime. That's how long this is. So it's like 4.5 years to get to this point. A lot of attorneys are like, yeah, this is halftime. So we're probably another 4, 5, 6 years away from like getting this thing all settled out. And the entire time, the defense is building their appeal strategy in a higher court. They wanted to see what was presented from the plaintiff's side, and they just held their cards close in this case. That's, again, it's speculation, but it makes sense. When the attorney told me that, I was like, wow, that's an interesting thing. I'm not an attorney, but it's interesting that was the case, or that could be the case, that the whole time NAR is sitting, and all these people are sitting here building the appeal case. They use this case as a play in their playbook for the next trial, for the next case with a new jury, in a new judge, in a new courthouse. So Dominic, it's funny that you picked right up on that. Again, you probably could have been a great attorney based on the feedback we're getting. But does that make sense to you, Dom?
Yeah, it absolutely does. I looked at the tort history of this judge, of Stephen Bow,
yeah.
And I can see why NAR and their attorneys would want to take this to the 8th District Court of Appeals, because they have a history of more favorable judgments towards traditional business practices. I think that's the safest way for me to say that.
Yeah. Well said. And so Ben brought something up that was interesting too. So let's talk about the appeal and what this could look like. Again, for the audience sake, we're not attorneys. We don't know what's going to happen. All that we know is that the spokesperson for NAR already came out, and obviously they're going to appeal this. And every attorney that has any experience have all said the same thing, that this is just halftime. Just pump the brakes. This is halftime. This is years and years and years away of being like truly sorted out. But Ben, you brought up something really interesting. You said if NAR builds, or if they add on additional legal support, legal teams, it costs money to do this, right? And so is there a potential NAR fee assessment right around the corner to all its members to say, hey, we're going to continue to fight this, but we're going to ask, because they already raised the fees, right? So that was earlier this year. You guys remember that. NAR has already raised the fees. Could there be an assessment? Again, this is all, we're just speculating here, to all 1.6 million people to say, hey, we're fighting on your behalf. We need help. We need more support. We're building this legal team. Ben, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, it was your idea. I'm just curious, and I thought it was a good one.
Yeah. So, I mean, you look at this whole thing, the reason that they're going after the big brokers, not the little mom and pops, why they're going after NAR is because, Catchmark knows, and he's going after the people with the money. But the money's only going to go so far. So just like anything, you live in an HOA or whatever, and they don't have the money to do something that they need to do, then they assess their members, right? And that will be the tipping point, I think, of, one, are they going to keep the leadership on at NAR and these inflated salaries and all of that? Or are we going to get like a whole new leadership? Is Bob Goldberg going to step down and the whole leadership, and we get new leadership, new approach, new counsel, whatever? But back to the assessment, like the money's got to come from somewhere, right? So, I mean, I don't even know. Can NAR just go bankrupt? Like what that all could look like. But yeah, they can't keep doing what they're doing with their salary structure and all of that, and keep moving forward.
Well, especially if this is another 4 or 5 year fight. Go ahead, Dom.
Well, yeah, I guess that's a great point that Ben brings up, this assessment. I would think that in advance of asking for more money, there would be a clear demonstration of value. Yeah. Like maybe, hey, this thing was close. We almost got them there. There's nothing, and there's nothing to indicate. There's nothing to indicate that hey, listen, we have a strategy that we're going to put into place in the future that's going to get this all ironed out. It's nothing like that. We didn't see anything like that. So they're sure putting a lot of faith in their members that they're going to get this sorted out if they in fact do ask for an assessment.
Because everybody will just leave, right, Dom? Like if they don't see that value, they'll just be like, well, I'm not going to stay. I'm not going to pay that. I'm just going to leave before I pay that assessment.
Yeah, well, and if that happened, if the whole thing, if everybody said, you know what, NAR is not worth it, I'm not paying my dues, I don't have to be a member anymore, then the whole thing will crumble, because I can't imagine that somebody else is just going to pick up the baton and run with this without significant funding.
Yeah, that's exactly right. When we're going to talk about the potential new landscape as a result of this, but you're right. I mean, now that you've got these huge companies coming out and saying, listen, agents, you no longer have to be part of NAR. You no longer have to be part, and they start losing, there was one report that came out about a month ago that said that NAR could lose upwards to 1 million of its members if this case went the way that it just did, which is the real estate industry losing. And if that is the case, you guys are right. It's like, where's the money going to come from for NAR to really fight this? So here's what happened in addition.
I got a question on that too before we move on. Like why didn't NAR just settle if they knew that they weren't going to win this? And two, like, if they really thought they were going to win this or weren't like super sure, why didn't they, the money they do have now, throw all of it at this? Because they do have the cash to like. Well, because go ahead.
Again, I don't know this for certain, but I would imagine if they were to settle this case, that it almost negates their ability to appeal. You can't agree and then appeal yourself, Yeah. So I think that's why.
So do you think that they came into this with like a cocky approach of thinking that they were going to win versus like throwing everything at it? Or like Dom said, is it they've got, pocket aces up the sleeve and they just haven't shown it yet?
based on my feedback, again, not an attorney, not a legal strategist, but just based on some of the conversations I've had with some of these attorneys, that this case was just a stepping stone to the next case. So from that feedback, again, all speculation, it's just an opinion, no idea if there's any facts to this whatsoever. I think they're implying that they knew they were going to lose this.
Yeah.
You know, and based on the outcome, makes sense. I mean, a 2-hour deliberation and a 1 hour, hey, how do we calculate damages? You know, like it was almost like the judge, the jury, the whole case, we knew the whole time that the plaintiffs were going to win. And so that's the way it seems anyway.
Lost the battle, we're in it to win the war type of thing.
Yeah.
There were a couple of things with regard to how quickly this was deliberated. In the original jury instructions, well, there's a line that stood out to me. I've read through all of this. It makes your eyes bleed, but this line stood out to me to the jury. You are allowed to consider the evidence in light of your own observations and experiences. Right. So probably a number of these jurors, I don't know a whole lot about the jurors, but, you know, also did a real estate transaction where they paid a buyer's agent, and it is allowing them to say, yeah, that wasn't fair. That wasn't fair at all. And then there's this questionnaire at the end, the 5 questions at the end that they had to fill in, and basically asking that question again, was this fair? Do you feel like they got together and duped you on this? I have the questions here. But the other thing in a civil trial is this whole preponderance of evidence. I don't know if you guys like realistically, well, according to the law, in a civil suit, there just has to be a preponderance of evidence. This isn't a criminal trial where it has to be proven beyond the shadow of a doubt that there was some sort of collusion or conspiracy. It just has to be greater than 50% chance that this happened. So sure, jurors, how easy is that to decide? Yeah, probably happened. And now, boom, $5 billion. So to Ben's point and your point, Brandon, I hope that NAR has got some pocket aces, because if they don't, they put on a pretty weak show.
Yeah. And you're right. With the burden of proof in a civil trial, it just has to be 50.1% likely. And so, that is difficult. It's just tough. It's not like a criminal case. So with the buyer agent debate, we're going to come to that in the show in just a little bit, because as we've been covering this, I think a lot of agents that listen and watch the show and comment on other YouTube videos just like this from other creators, I think a lot of agents are up in arms that people are challenging the value of a buyer's agent. And I don't want to debate that. I just want to look at the evidence of what these homeowners believe. And that is this, that 500,000 homeowners said, we don't believe, we don't want to pay a buyer's agent. So we're going to come back to that thought in just a second. So all the agents that are up in arms that want to argue buyer's agents are really valuable, that's one opinion, but the judge is not the agents. The judge is the homeowner, who now is going to be in a position to determine whether or not they're going to pay for that or not. All right, we'll come back to that in a second. So the crazier thing, verdict comes out yesterday, and this attorney, Ketchmer, is like, well, we're not done yet. He files another class action lawsuit against, let me go to it. Against EXP, Compass, Redfin, Weichert, United Real Estate, Howard Hanna, Douglas Element, and yet again, the NAR. And so he's coming after everyone. He's coming after the entire industry, not just these 500,000 homeowners in Kansas. He's coming after it all. So when you guys, Dom, when you saw that, what's your take on that?
Well, my immediate thought was, okay, if this was just about setting a precedent and correcting a clear violation of the Sherman antitrust, then this settlement that we have right now would be enough. But if this was more about a money grab, then why wouldn't you go after every possible defendant that you can name? Because they already found out with Remax and Realogy, Anywhere, that if you apply enough pressure, they can get settlements out of some of these people. And I'm sure they will. You can sue anybody for anything and keep the pressure on. And those companies determined that it was more economically viable for them just to stroke some checks for 50, 60, 70, 80 million dollars and make this go away. And that's exactly what these class action suits are designed for. They're money grabs. If it was all about creating a more fair system, well, this would be the end of it.
It's a great point. Yeah. Ben, your thoughts on the new filing?
Yeah, I mean, to what Dom said, if you just, they say 20, 30, 40% of these is kind of what the attorney takes. So, on 1.8, that's about, $600-800 million that Ketchmark took home yesterday. I think I would say, well, there's a lot more territory here with the exact same situation, and he's just going to keep going, right? He's got the support. He has, got some pats on the back and some wins, and he's just going to keep going. And he clearly does not have very much respect for real estate agents and the industry.
Yeah. So let's transition and talk about the future landscape of the real estate industry. All right, let's jump into that. And again, this is all speculation. No one has a crystal ball. This is just our opinions, right? So I think the first question that we have to look at is, what is the future of the buyer agent? And when I look at that question, the first question that comes to my mind, you guys, is who's going to pay for that service? So let's look at some recent events. So you have the state of New York who comes out and says, not only do you not have to offer a buyer agent commission, it's prohibited for a listing agent to pay a buyer agent commission, because we're viewing that as a kickback. And the seller, if they choose, can offer to pay another agent who brings a buyer. But the listing agent, the days of seller paying listing agent X% and listing agent taking a piece of that and paying another agent, they're looking at that as a kickback, or AKA a RESPA violation. And I want to talk about that first and foremost, because I don't think enough people are talking about that. And I hadn't thought about that either until just recently. And I said, that's interesting, because they're looking at this the same way on all real estate commissions. We can't take real estate commissions and pay a loan officer for giving us a referral. We can't take our commissions and pay an attorney who gives us a referral. And so they're looking at that exchange of commission from listing agent to buyer agent as a potential kickback. So if that happens, then who's left to pay? It's either going to be the seller offering to pay a buyer agent commission, or it's going to have to be the buyer coming out of pocket. So let's stick on the first option, which is, okay, well, let's actually go back. Your guys' thoughts on the likelihood that offering to give up some of your commission as a listing agent to buyer agents being prohibited. What do you guys think the likelihood of that happening? So Dom, I'll go to you first.
Yep. Well, we're going to find out, because this judge is going to have the opportunity to the judge in the trial we've been talking about is going to have the opportunity to either prohibit that or to make it optional. But let's say that it becomes prohibited. To me, all that changes, well, it's not a small thing, but it changes the conversation that we have with a seller when we meet them to talk about getting their home sold and attracting the most number of qualified buyers to come and see their home and potentially write offers. And the language is going to switch from I charge 6% and we share that with a cooperating broker that brings us a qualified buyer. That conversation is now going to change to I charge 3%. Historically, we have offered to pay a buyer's agent a cooperating fee to bring their client to see your home. That's up to you now, Mr. Seller, if you would like to offer that to a buyer's agent and their brokerage to bring their qualified buyers. But you don't have to. We can just throw it out there and see what happens.
So the debate is, so there's so much nuance to what Dominic just said. So I want to stay here for just a minute. This whole thing, I mean, commissions are all negotiable, right? And so every agent charges X, and I think that the debatable part that a lot of agents get mad about is, and I'll just ask you guys, what is the likelihood, Dominic, that you think sellers take you up on that? What is the likelihood that a seller says, I'm trying to think through the average consumer. They have no idea, right? Here's where this starts. There's so many thoughts in my mind that I want to talk about. First off, I am under the belief that when a seller of a home meets with a real estate agent to list and sell their home, I believe with every fiber of my being that they assume that it's that agent who is going to be doing the selling of their home. Until the listing agent brings into the equation buyer cooperating agent, when a seller hires Dominic to sell the home, I believe that most sellers believe that Dominic they're hiring Dominic to sell the house. Do you guys agree with that? Before we go on, there's a lot of nuance, there's a lot of context, just that one thought, or do you believe every homeowner in America knows that when they hire a listing agent, that there's going to be a buyer agent associated with the deal? What do you guys believe is more likely?
Well, I just know that based on I can only speak to this based on my experience, but somebody who's previously sold a home is acutely aware that the listing agent isn't the only one who's going to be showing up with a buyer. Now, a first-time home seller, somebody who's never been through the process before, could very well be under the impression that the listing agent is going to bring the buyers. Now, this is something that I explain in pretty deep detail when I'm having that conversation with a seller, how it's all going to work. My job as a listing agent, at least up until this point, was to promote their property in its very best possible light. And in all likelihood, one of the 8,000 other agents in my market who's currently working with 2, 3, 4 buyers is going to be bringing the actual buyer that writes us an offer. And that's when I get into the conversation about cooperating brokers' fees.
So my question is, I get it.
Yeah.
But I want you to think about this. If you were to interview the 5 million people that will sell a home this year and next year and the year after that, before you brought that up, I know your script and I love it. Before you brought it up to the seller, you're saying that the vast majority of home sellers, when they think about selling their home and hiring a realtor, they believe that there's going to be 2 agents involved from the get-go. You believe that that is the case?
If they have previously sold a home, yes. If they have not ever experienced selling a home, then it's quite possible that they could believe that there will only be 1 agent involved. I think most consumers that have previously sold a home are aware that there is a possibility that there will be 2 agents involved. That's my position.
Okay. Ben, your thoughts on that?
I think it's a combination of they absolutely think Brandon is selling the home, but they don't understand completely how it all comes together. But oftentimes another agent will be representing the buyer.
Okay. Yeah. My experience, I guess, has been a little different. You know, it's when I sell my own listing, there's never any question about my commission. There's never any question about anything. But when there's another buyer agent involved, I get all kinds of questions, and the questions around, well, what does that mean? What's their role in this? And so I don't know. I think that 2 things. I think that, Dom, you and I differ here. I think that the home seller, even if they've done it before, most people that have done it before, you're talking about once or twice in a lifetime. If we were to do a nationwide survey, I am under the belief, it's my position, that they would think, yeah, the agent I'm hiring is the one who's going to be selling my house. That's why they ask you to be at showings. That's why they're coming to you for all of this information. And then the only other evidence I have is 500,000 homeowners in Kansas said, we don't want anything to do with the buyer agent commission. We're fine with the listing agent commission, but we don't want to pay this. In fact, they just won. They just won that argument.
Hold on a second here. They're saying that in hindsight. They didn't say it at the time when they were signing that contract. they're saying it now, looking back, oh, wait a minute, that wasn't fair. But these 500,000 people over the last 4 years all signed a contract clearly stating, well, at least I don't know what contracts look like in Kansas or Missouri, but in my market, it's pretty clear. The breakdown of what the total commission is going to be and how it's going to be shared with the cooperating brokers, very clear.
Here's my question. Here's my question for you.
Okay.
Do you believe that if all 500,000 of these home sales, of these homeowners, did not have a buyer agent, that all the listing agents were the ones who sold the property and there was never a buyer agent involved and they got all the commission, would there have ever been a lawsuit? Would they have looked back in hindsight and even questioned anything?
Well, no. Yeah. No, look, that's a fantasy scenario. But yeah, clearly, if there was no buyer's agent and there had never been buyer's agents, then this lawsuit couldn't exist. That is the truth.
That's just my position. It's that these homeowners are questioning the value of this other agent being involved, because I've never had it, just to what I was just saying, sellers agree. You're right. The seller's agreeing, they sign a contract. I'm paying you X percent, 5, 6, 7%. And if you sell the home, they never question that ever, right? And so, again, it's not my opinion one way or the other. It's just these questions that I'm thinking about. I'm under the belief of what you just said. I agree with you that if there was no buyer's agent, there would have been no hindsight 2020. I agreed to pay you 6%. You sold the house and you got 6%. I just think that the question mark is around this buyer agency, and that's essentially how this court saw it too, which is unfortunate.
Yeah.
So the question is then, moving forward, what does that mean for the real estate industry when buyer agent commissions? So going back to the original question, I'll go back to you, Dom, is how do you feel now that we just talked about what we just talked about? The next thing is, do you believe more sellers will opt in to pay, or less sellers will be willing to pay?
Yep. Well, like we talked about this early on in one of our earlier podcasts about this, there's going to be a period of transition. If this becomes optional, then at first, I think sellers would be more amenable to all it's changing is the wording of the contract. They're still going to pay the same amount. It's just going to be different how the buyer's agent is paid. Now, as we move forward through this period of transition and it becomes more and more possible and frequent that a buyer comes directly to the listing agent, the practice of paying a buyer's agent may very well fade away.
Yeah.
But I guess what I'm saying, Brandon, is that I don't believe that as a result of this, every seller in America is going to be like, I'm not paying a buyer's agent anymore, baby. That's it. It's over. It's not going to happen like that.
Yeah, I totally agree. There ain't no homeowners that even know about this.
That's right.
No one's even paying attention to this except for real estate agents. So until it's a thing, we're still 4 or 5 years out. That's why we're just speculating. This is just what do we believe to happen? This whole idea around, well, I guess that's another point. So if the sellers pay or don't pay, that's one thing we just talked about. The other option is buyers paying their own agent compensation. So let's talk about that for a second. Ben brought up another good point this morning. And Ben, you want to talk about that as far as how how that potentially works and buyers looking to overpay potentially?
Yeah, for sure. So, you go in to buy this home, the seller is going to want, we got into this before too, Dom, right? So we'll see where this goes. But
yeah, this will be good.
The seller is going to want to list their home for what they believe it's worth, right? And a lot of times that comes off of appraised value, comps, all that stuff, okay? If now the buyer has to pay that and pay an agent fee, now they're overpaying for the home. The home's appraised value, whatever, sale price, however we get to there, is $100,000, and they're going to pay an extra $2,000 to their agent. Now we're at 102 for a house that's worth 100. Okay, so we're paying that fee on top of it. So that's just an interesting point where before they weren't paying that, right? So an agent presenting this as the listing agent to the seller's not going to say, well, cool, now I don't have to pay that. I'm just going to list it for $98,000. I would argue that the seller's going to say every time, well, it's worth $100. I'm going to sell it for $100.
Yeah. So this is the before and after. I think we're all, well, I see it pretty clearly too. But Dom, I want to see your take on this. The way it works right now is you sell the house. We'll just keep it easy numbers for $100K. Commissions come off the $100K, right? Ever all in agreement with that?
Yep.
I think what Ben's saying is in a world where if a buyer chooses to hire their own representation, they're still going to pay $100 for the house. The seller's not going to do anything to the price of the home. But if they choose to pay buyer agent commission, it doesn't come out of the $100. They have to come on top of the $100. That's what you're saying, Ben, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So Dom, how do you see that?
Yeah, I think in a future world that is potentially how it could go.
Yeah, closing costs, it's just be another closing cost. So whether they're paying more for the home or whatever, I just thought about that too, Ben. It's just additional closing costs to the buyer that the buyer doesn't have today, right?
Yeah, and buyers already have a really hard time coming up with cost, right? And they can finance that stuff. They can't finance commission. So that's something else that, could just be something that gets solved for and changed or whatnot moving forward, and it gets rolled in there. I don't know.
Yeah.
So right now, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are saying that they will not allow for the financing of commissions.
Correct.
However, our NAR lobby is one of the most powerful lobbies in the country, and they are working on how did they phrase it? I'm actually going to see my NAR lobbyist here in a week or so, but they are working on ways to create more flexibility for buyers to allow for representation from a buyer's agent. And what that sounded like to me was figuring out a way to get it financed.
Yeah. Well, and that brings us right into the next point, which is depending on like the actual outcomes of this case and future cases, the argument that agents are making right now is based on the current landscape. So we're speaking under the context, y'all, of a new landscape. And so under a new landscape, I think many things will change. One, mortgage guidelines and what they can and cannot finance. And then the other big thing, when we've talked about this in past episodes, that agents were up in arms about, which is, what do you mean? The buyers are just going to go directly to the listing agent and they're going to go unrepresented because of, you can't do dual agency. Right. But I think everything will change. So in a world where, because I don't want to debate will or will not. I mean, it's just, we're not going to get anywhere with that. Is the seller going to pay? Will the seller pay? We don't know. Will the buyers pay?
The value of a buyer's agent, like, of course they're valuable, right? Like,
that's right.
We're in a new world where we've got to adapt.
Yeah, nobody's arguing that value. That's a great point. Buyer's agents, of course, you're bringing value to the table. We're not debating that. We're debating who's going to pay for it and who's willing to pay and who's not willing to pay.
Yeah, we're already in that new world. What's it going to look like? What are people going to do, not do?
That's right. And one of the big things that I think will also change as a result is this whole, well, let's just pretend buyer's agent commissions no one's willing to pay. Let's just pretend that that's the case. Well, how can that? We'll just end up back in court because all these buyers will be unrepresented. Right. Unless that changes too. So when you look at things like dual agency and you look at different potential agreements that aren't in existence today that do provide protection to the buyer, there could be a whole new landscape. I think everything and anything's on the table is my point. The way I'm looking at this is saying, if there's one agent involved in the transaction, there'll be new agreements in place to protect the consumer because the CFPB is not going to allow consumers to go that's the class they're protecting. And so I think that potentially all of that gets looked at and we get into a brand new world that doesn't exist today where potentially there's one agent involved of the sale of a home and both parties have rights. Both parties are protected in some way. I don't know. I don't have the crystal ball, but I don't think there's a world where as a result of this lawsuit, now all buyers go unrepresented. I don't think it's just so cut and dry like that. Dominic, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, like I agree 100%. We can't know for sure which way it's going to go. I was just thinking as you were saying that, I'm not sure how a judge can prohibit a seller from agreeing to do something that they believe is going to help get their home sold with a deal that they agree to. I'm thinking maybe this is going to become an optional situation
Well,
based on
so
that thought.
so let's it's not the prohibit from my understanding, they're not prohibiting the seller from doing anything. They're prohibiting what we can do with the money.
It's
But
the
if a
path of
seller
the money
says,
will
"Hey,
change.
do whatever you got to do to get my house sold for $1 million," I don't care. I want the sale price to be $1 million, and I'm paying you 6% to get it done. Well, how I'm just not sure about that. I guess I
So,
don't know
like,
enough.
right
about
now-
I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why. So yeah, real quick, I'll tell you why. Because the way that they're looking at that is then argue against this, Dom. So fine. I just want this price. I don't care what you do. I'm going to pay you 6% to do it. I don't care what you do to do it. What would then prohibit you from going to anybody, attorneys, CPAs, saying, "Hey, give me a buyer and I'll give you $10,000 kickback"? What's different about, well, that brings up a new argument. Do you believe, based on what you're saying, you believe that kickbacks shouldn't be illegal, that the RESPA violation should not be illegal, that agents should be able to use that commission any way they want, including pay a referral fee to anybody who gives the client?
Yeah, I'm not so convinced that this is a kickback. Otherwise, every state in the country would have done this right away.
No.
Only
That's what I'm saying.
why only New York, right? I'm not convinced that this is the same as a kickback because it's part of achieving a common goal for the seller that the sellers agreed to. If they don't care how the result happens, why is this considered a kickback?
I'm agreeing with you. So what would be the difference if a buyer agent brings you a buyer and you give me 3% of the commission? What's different than if an attorney has a client and that attorney says, "Well, give me half the commission"?
I don't think it is different.
Yeah. So
It's not different.
that's what I'm saying. You believe that a kickback RESPA violation should not be the case. That we should be able to do that.
Yeah, yes, 100%.
Got it.
Yes,
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not a kickback. This is a cooperating fee. I don't care. I don't care if the plumber that's fixing my sink says, "Hey, I got a buyer."
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I don't think I totally disagree with you. I know it's so interesting. Why does it matter? It's like, yeah. So
And so, like, we've talked about this too before. Just the fact of, like, on your contract, Dominic, it says 6%, and you're agreeing that a portion of that is going to go to the buyer's agent. It's outlined there. So maybe it just looks like in our MLS, it has a button where you have to distinguish if you have somewhat of a flexible commission. If I sell the home, I get X amount. If an agent's involved, then the split is different, right? So I feel like it could look like that moving forward too. Just when you do have multiple offers, it all has to be outlined and taken into account.
Yep.
Yeah, and that was my point. I just think that all of this has to be relooked at. And that's why I was trying to understand that, Dominic, from your point of view, because I agree with you. Like, what's the difference? What's the difference of who does what? If the seller agrees to pay X amount of dollars to get my home sold by any means necessary, what does it matter? All right, so let's keep moving forward. So I want to now talk through. I mean, I think for listing agents and the role they have with sellers, may look a little different. It's nowhere close to how different it's going to look on the buyer agent side. But I think the listing agent role in this whole thing is pretty close to what it is today. Do you guys think there's any substantial difference to I mean, if there's no buyer agent commission, you can make the argument, well, now listing agents are having to do double the work. They're getting half the money, all of that. However, there's upside to that too. You have all the consumers coming directly to them. They all have houses to sell too. So there's two arguments there. I think listing agents would make more money as a result, not less money. Yes, they're doing more work to sell a house, but they're getting all the opportunity because the consumers are coming directly to them potentially. But how do you guys see this impacting the listing agent? Ben, let's go to you first.
It's going to be more of a production-based team model where you're going to have to, like you said, to facilitate those deals, have some structure around that to show the home, to do this and that. But yes, I think that you're right. The leads, the communication, it's going to, if anything, make that portion of the deal smoother. But yeah, it's going to stay the same, and things are going to change dramatically for the buyer's agent, obviously.
For sure. Dom, how do you see it impacting the listing agent?
Yep. As a listing agent, if I knew this was coming down the pipe for sure, I would be implementing systems in my business that allow for me to communicate directly with the buyers of properties. It would change the way that we are negotiating deals with buyers. It does put you as a listing agent in the position of being able to actually exercise your skills in negotiation, because right now you're just talking to a buyer's agent and you have no idea what they're telling their client. Now you will be in the position of communicating directly with buyers, and if your skill set is not on point, it's going to need to be in order to be effective. But you'll have to have the systems in place that allow for buyer's agents to get directly in touch with you at a much higher level than they are now. Sure, occasionally buyers do reach out directly to the listing agent. However, now they could potentially all be doing that, and you're going to have the right systems in place to make sure that everybody's treated fairly and has an equal opportunity to purchase a property if they are bringing the highest and best offer. And that's just a little bit different from what I think most agents and listing agents are doing right now. It's going to be a refinement of their business model. How about that?
Yeah, big time. This is be another thing that changes. Yeah. And so I want to talk about this other thing that I don't think a lot of people are talking about, which is, okay, if buyer agent commissions, we know are obviously under scrutiny through these lawsuits. If buyer agent commissions are, just something that becomes more scarce, we'll call it, what happens to these portal businesses, the Zillows, the Realtor.coms that are making billions and billions of dollars, and the teams that operate solely off of a buyer internet lead model? That's what I want to talk about. Dominic, go ahead. You are anxious to get started.
I was chomping at the bit because I was watching this yesterday afternoon and at market open this morning. I'll tell you what, the market doesn't like it, because Zillow and other portal company stocks were down heavily yesterday afternoon, 7, 8, 9%. So the market doesn't like the direction that is going, because they know, the market knows where Zillow's revenue is, and their revenue is in selling buyer leads through their premium services to buyer agents and buyer agent teams. So if that goes away, they're going to have to reshuffle what they're doing to generate revenue. And we talked about it before. What they're going to do is they'll charge listing agents to market those properties, and I believe that's where the revenue will come from. But there is one other major development with Zillow that, Brandon, I don't know if you probably are aware of this, but Zillow probably is taking action already to help curtail this. Are you aware of this acquisition they made? They announced yesterday?
No, tell us. This is breaking news.
Zillow is acquiring Follow Up Boss for $400 million. And they are going to continue to be in the data collection business. And you better believe that Zillow is going to start selling listing agents leads based on seller activity online, right? And wow, I'm not sure I'd be comfortable with Zillow having access to my Follow Up Boss account.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, here's another take on it is certainly they could go to a model where they're charging agents and sellers to list their house on Zillow platform, but even more so, this might just be the move where Zillow just gets right into brokerage business, where they're just listing agents. So if you want your properties on Zillow, we're just going to charge you 2-3%. We have our licensed agents. We'll handle the whole thing, and we're out of the lead business completely. That's what I thought about.
Interesting. Yeah, that certainly would be a direction for them to go. I think the model that they have now is considerably more profitable than the brokerage model. So I guess yeah, I mean, they'd have to be looking at this through some different lights, right?
Well, this is my light on it. I think a lot of people are talking about how they're going to go under business, they're going to go out, buyer leads are worthless now. I think they are so well positioned and have so much leverage and respect from the consumer because everybody uses Zillow. That it's a simple pivot, and they could really take over in a powerful way. And especially you look at, go ahead.
No, yeah, they could just go to all the consumers that they've won over. To Ben's point, the consumers love Zillow. I mean, they think Zillow is the whole thing, right? And so they could pivot easily and just say, well, yeah, just we'll handle the entire transaction. We've got our listing agent concierge team, and you put it on our platform for 1%, 1.5%, and we'll handle the entire transaction for you.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, if there is no buyer's agent and the listing agent, it's all about marketing. It's all about getting your property the most exposure. I think you do that through a platform like that, or like really niching down. It's like, I own this neighborhood, this lake, like everybody comes to me because they know, I've got the listing, I know what's coming, that sort of thing.
Yeah, it'll be interesting.
Okay, so that brings up another question. Brandon, you guys were talking about before we started how you closely follow the car market. What's going to stop the end result being you sell your house like you sell your collector car now? You put it up on a site like Bring a Trailer. Well, you're going to put your home up on a site like Zillow. You as the seller just hire the professional photographer and videographer, put it up on Zillow. Zillow charges you 1.5%. Why do you need a listing agent?
Well, that's, I think, what the billions and billions of dollars getting pumped in the industry wants to see. I mean, they're coming after it so hard. That's exactly what they want. Is
That's
to
what
have a world.
Ketchmark said in his glory statement, was all about that.
Yeah, the travel agent, the car market, the legal Zoom. Why need an attorney? You just get all your stuff online. That's where these investors and these internet companies are trying to. It's a huge money grab. They see billions and billions of dollars in real estate commissions. It's like, consumers, you don't need agents. Just throw this on this website. We'll have this concierge team that walks you through every step of the way, right? So you get all your questions answered. You get the support that you need. And the antiquated, this is not me saying this. Don't get all mad at me. I'm just saying this is why people pump billions of dollars into these industries, is to take out the middleman. That's what these industries continue to try to do with every industry, not just the car business, not just attorneys, not just CPAs. And I mean, look at every industry. You look at, TurboTax, you look at LegalZoom, you look at Auto Trader, you look at all these platforms. It's just happening in real estate. That's all.
Here's a great example, though. We talk, you built a lot of what you do in coaching around this for sale by owners. Zillow, if it's this great, they allow you to post your house for sale by owner. How many actually sell before getting relisted with an agent?
Yeah, exactly.
What if it's the only way? What if it becomes more common for people to do a transaction without an agent? And this brings up the financial services industry. Like, 15 years ago, we didn't have Webull and I can't think of all of the online or E-Trade. You don't need a financial services person anymore. You can use one, but the amount of money they charge is dramatically less. So there's a world possibly down the road.
I'll tell you my opinion on that is that the market is so big that there won't ever be just a one model takes all. There's different segments of the market. And the reason I know this and the reason I believe this is, look at anything. There is entry-level vehicles that people buy, and people are still buying $1 million vehicles. It's a different market. There's high-end luxury restaurants, and there's fast food. There's not one model that takes over everything. And go ahead.
No, go ahead, sorry. Well, I would just argue even more so, like, there's two types of currencies. There's time and there's money.
Yeah.
So there's always going to be the guy that pays the financial advisor because he has more money than he has time. And there's going to be the guy that has more time and he's going to spend all the time researching, doing his investments, etc.
Yeah, it's 100%. So there's different segments of the marketplace. There's people out there that just would prefer to do exactly what you guys are talking about. They pay for the CPA. They pay for these professional services because of what they get in exchange. I have a personal CPA, but I have good friends that are really successful and they do TurboTax. So I think that there's always going to be a place for high-level real estate agents who provide a high level of service to their clients, who charge a premium for their services that homeowners will always take you up on. I don't think this doom and gloom of like all or nothing. Hell, we still have a travel agent. You look at how travel has been so easy to just do online. We pay a travel agent, and it's been amazing, And so there's not all or nothing. That'd be my opinion, Dom. I don't know how you see it, but I don't think you gobble up the whole thing,
No, I agree with you. I just think what we have here is a trimming of the fat in the industry, and I think it's just a natural progression that technology allows for. As you pointed out, there's still concierge type services for people who value the opinion and advice and knowledge of a professional, and they're willing to pay for that. But the people at the other end, those are going to go away. That fat's going to get trimmed off.
Yeah. So check this out. I'll give you the best analogy of ever because I lived it. Okay. So, most of you, well, you guys know, but some of the audience knows, I started my career off at Quicken Loans, right? And the model at the time, it's normal now, right? But at the time, we were an online lender. And our number one objection is like, no, I'm going to my local bank. What are you talking about, online lender? I'm not getting my mortgage online from somebody over the phone. I'm going to see Bob, the banker, down the street. Everyone thought it was insane at the time. Insane, right? 20 years ago. Well, now you look today and Rocket Mortgage, which used to be Quicken Loans, number one mortgage company in the world. Number one in a model that everybody thought was never going to work. But here's the point, Dom. What market share do you think the number one mortgage company on the planet has of the mortgage market in this country?
I actually have no idea.
3.8%. That's it. So my point is the company that's dominating the space, like we talked about, has like 4% of the market. Meaning 96% of the market doesn't do business with Rocket Mortgage, the biggest, baddest on the planet. So even if Zillow does whatever, you're talking about, the market's so big, maybe they get 5% of the market, 8% of the market, and then that's them crushing. But it also means they don't get 95% of the market. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
When I heard that, I'm like, that's insane to me. That like, it just put in perspective of how big the market is, and this whole fear of like doom and gloom of like realtors being extinct. So right here, Rocket's purchase, they have 3.5% market share. It's like, insane. It just tells me how big the market is. Like, there's no such thing as like these. It's very rare to have a true monopoly. It's like there's consumers for everything. Just to go back, some like to go out to luxury restaurants and some like to get fast food. And I think there'll always be segments of the market that they want choice and they want options. So real quick, the teams that heavily build their business on these buyer leads, I think that will be a massive shift too. We've already seen it in our coaching business, literally team leaders reaching out to us saying we're shifting our entire model to listing only. And they're trying to get ahead of this because these agents or these team leaders that are solely dependent on getting all their business from these portals, I think are having to reanalyze their models. Dominic, what are your thoughts on that piece?
Well, yeah, I agree. We have seen that. That. And if I was a team leader that had a business model that was based on buying buyer leads, I also would be very carefully reevaluating that and moving my business towards a listing-based business. Because of whether the change happens tomorrow or in 5 years from now, I think we can all agree that there is going to be some sort of change here.
That's right. Yeah. And I just don't see, Ben, a lot of people talking about that piece, but all these major teams, if you look at the teams across the country, I mean, I make the vast argument that most of them are heavily an internet lead model. Most of them.
Yep. I agree.
They're doing the boom towns. They're doing the Commissions Inc. They're doing that's how they run their entire operation. and that's how, most of the business is coming from internet buyer leads. You're not getting commissions from those anymore. It's like they got to do some major reshifting. But yeah, you were going to say?
We've talked about just the fact that this is really going to potentially turn into more of a professional, industry, and there won't be people that are doing, 3, 4, 5 transactions a year. This will be a full-time gig. It'll just look different. And yeah, the teams will be all based on helping them develop the skills to go in, win the business, talk directly to the consumer versus, the way it looks now.
Yeah, nailed it, Ben. That's right.